The Florida State Seminoles might have just found their left tackle out of the transfer portal.
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Seminoles. I am your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football recruiting analyst and writer. Thank you for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen each and every day. I truly appreciate you stopping in to talk some Noles with me. Today's show is going to be brought to you by the College Football Playoffs. The College Football Playoff is here. You don't want to miss a moment of the action. The College Football Playoff, presented by Allstate, begins with 4 first-round games, December 20th and 21st on ESPN, ABC, TNT, and Max. Today, we're going to talk about, hopefully, Florida State's left tackle for the 2025 season. Before we get to that, I have several other things here about the transfer portal I kind of want to break down. Number one, we're going to have a couple different lists, things that Florida State needs to do in terms of players, things that Florida State needs to do overall from a big box perspective after what they've already achieved in the portal. And we're going to talk about several of the competitors for the Noles, who they've gotten, compare a little bit, talk about some of those guys. But again, first off, it's about Gunnar Hansen, offensive tackle from Vanderbilt, big guy, 6'5", 300 plus pounds, has a lot of starting experience, played in the Southeastern Conference this last year. I got to see him live play against Auburn. And quite frankly, Vanderbilt's offensive tackles, both of them played pretty well in that game. I have a healthy respect for Keldrick Falk, who's a future NFL player for Auburn. He's one of the best defensive linemen in the SEC this past year. And just in that game against, a matter of fact, you know what? I'll go ahead and share my screen. Might as well just go ahead and do that. And I'll talk everybody through all the stats here on Pro Football Focus. It's pretty impressive what he did. I was surprised because I thought, honestly, that Auburn would do not just a good job, but a great job against everybody up front for Vanderbilt. But they really didn't. They did okay against the run. But just as an example, again, Hansen played left tackle. He went against Falk. He went against Jalen McLeod, one of the better pass rushers in the league. He had a 79 pass blocking grade in that game alone. I saw it, and I thought he was pretty good. At that time, I had no idea, obviously, Florida State would be involved with him. But here are a few of the other notes about him. Against Missouri, pass blocking grade 66.5. That's pretty good. Alabama, 71.9. Kentucky, 76.1. Against Texas, they had the lowest rating out of the major teams, 56. But looking at his overall grades, that middle section there, I think he was a little banged up. He got a little bit better against Auburn, obviously, the pass blocking grade at 79. Then against South Carolina, there's no way that's this one. They rated him 4.8. Nobody has a 4.8. I think that's one of the reasons his overall pass blocking grade 61, but I'm not buying 4.8. He didn't win like 1 out of 20 snaps or whatever. But LSU 67.6, and then his best game was his last. And it's not like Tennessee isn't a very good defense up front. Their third down D was under 30% that they allowed, and they had several guys up front that were good pass rushers. 84.5 playing right tackle in that game. He played both. Gunnar Hansen's a really big pickup for Herb Hand, Gus Malzahn, the entire Florida State program, because no offense starts and does well, at least consistently, if you don't have a left tackle. Obviously, Thomas Castellanos is right-handed, so the left tackle spot is vital. Overall grades, offense 56.2, 57.8 for run blocking, and again, 61.1 for pass blocking, which I think is a little jaded. The most important stat, at least by Pro Football Focus, gave up 1 sack. Ironically, 0 sacks allowed per Pro Football Focus against the SEC, because it was against Georgia State of all teams. That is really wild. The 2 hits in addition to the sacks that he gave up were against Ball State. There's another random. And Texas. Obviously, Texas, that's not a shock. He gave up 17 hurries on the season. The team that gave him the most problems, and this is not surprising because they are very, very athletic on the edge, South Carolina got after him when he was playing right tackle. I'm not sure. I didn't watch that game, but 7 hurries is a lot. That was not a good game for him in that game, but still, at the same point, I'm not buying 4.8 for his overall pass blocking grade. When you look at him overall, snaps, this is a good sign. 722, so he's a durable guy. He's played at Indiana State and other places. So I think the experience, having traveled around, it helped him get to the Southeastern Conference level. It also allowed him to be a guy they could probably be counted on in big games. Again, Tennessee's got one of the better D lines in the country. 84.5. That's pretty impressive. As far as starts, he had 8 starts at left tackle. He also had 4 starts at right tackle. Having played both sides, that also gives Florida State a little more flexibility looking at how they want to handle spring ball. Herb Hand could do things differently and try different lineups, which he's known to do anyway. He'll cross-train guys. He's always done that. But if you've got a guy that's played both, you may give a few more reps, for instance, to Lucas Simmons, Jalen Early, whatever, some of the younger guys at left tackle during spring ball just to try it out. You need to have a backup. Plus, Hansen's going to be, I believe, a one-year guy at Florida State. So, yeah, he's going to be a valuable player for the Noles, but he's not going to be here long. So you got a little more room to play in spring ball, and that's important. Last point on this on the Pro Football Focus page, when you look at all the different reps, what stands out to you besides obviously sacks is great. He's pretty consistent. Again, the South Carolina game was his worst, and at the end, he took a big jump up with Tennessee. I don't see a guy that was just a Dow Joneser. Looking at his numbers, all the rankings, he's pretty consistent. That's a good sign for his future. As for overall what this does, I think this is another important point about getting Gunnar Hansen to Florida State. If you've got your potential left tackle, he's going to play one of the 2 spots. That'll take care of itself. It helps take some pressure off and getting other guys. I still am steadfast that Florida State needs at minimum 4 offensive linemen from the portal, and I think 5 really. But if they went that route, they better be confident about some of the younger guys that haven't played as much. We'll see, Daniels or somebody else. But Florida State can now focus on a fewer number of players. Maybe it's Caden Kittler next, which would be great. I'll talk about him in a minute. But they don't have to worry about getting a tackle. They should be able to get one of the younger guys to play right tackle, if nothing else, I would assume. It would be great to get another offensive tackle with experience like Hansen, but I don't know how much you're going to spend. We're going to talk about that also here in a moment. But again, you could get 3 more guys that could at least compete for a starting role, and then maybe 1 more guy that's, shall we say, maybe a year away. And then perhaps some freshmen that you liked, you didn't get out of the high school ranks, and maybe Norvell liked, maybe Malzahn liked, maybe all of them did. It's a year or 2 away, but it's got a lot of upside. Maybe he's like the 6th guy you take. It's just getting the left tackle, at least most likely, in Gunnar Hansen is huge. Now, talking about the spots, left tackle is one thing, and it's arguably the most difficult to get. How do they denote how much money out of their NIL to use on O-line? It's by far the biggest need. That's not a newsflash. How much money should they spend? And I posted this on X, a poll that I did. And to be honest with you, I don't know hardline what I would say, but it's debatable. Florida State has a lot of different guys that they could go after, and they could spend a ton of money on the portal. It depends. I'm a little bit shy on this. I'll share my screen again here for the folks that are on YouTube, but I'm just going to read these off. I think it's a fascinating topic personally. I mean, not everybody may agree, but here's what I have up here as regards to the poll. Do they spend up to 25% on their NIL allotment towards O-line? Is it 25 to 35? Is it 35 to 45? Or is it over 45%? Right now, over 45% is at 42.9% in terms of the grades that are in, like that of the votes. But I just put this up a little bit ago. I'm curious what it ends up being. I put it up for a 2-day poll at FBScout_Florida. If you want to check out other Noles news, other things with our podcast, this is the place to do it. But I think this is a fascinating poll. I'd be curious to see what everybody thinks, because Florida State, quite honestly, if they spent 45%, I wouldn't hate on it, because again, 5 is probably the lowest number I'd want to go. If they went 4, it is what it is. But it could be like a quarter of your players. And I imagine Hansen's going to be expensive. I imagine a few more guys are going to be expensive too, because they need veterans. They do. But I'm curious. Let me know what you think in the comments on the YouTube page. It's a pretty fascinating topic, at least for me. Now, before we transition into some more Florida State news on players, I want to check one more thing here on this part of the segment. Note that I've got something coming up talking about making sure that the overall portal class at the end is important. We're going to talk about that a little bit in a minute. And this is not a race that's a sprint. This is a race that is a marathon. Remember, the transfer portal opens right now. It's open. It'll end towards the end of this month. But there is also a spring window open. Just put that in the back of your mind for later in the show because I'm going to bring that back up. But next, we're going to talk about some of the keys to Florida State, some of the guys they're in on, some of the guys they've missed on. We need to just kind of get a bigger update. That is next here on Locked On Seminoles. Get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the National Football League, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. This show is also brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money action on sports. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You must pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app. All right. Make sure that you're checking this out right now because all the bowl games and stuff, it's a lot of fun. Player props, over-unders, and all kinds of things. I think the bowl games are the best way to go. You can do that. And again, you have a chance to win up to 1,000 times your money, depending on which things you pick. Also, Prize Picks offers MasterCard for quick and easy deposits into your account this sports season. So join now because this holiday season, Prize Picks is giving away 2 free picks in December, and they're giving away $30 million in rewards during Picksmas. So download the app, use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Once again, download the app and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. How does Florida State manage all this? Because I went through the incredible number of guys that have committed or joined the portal just in the last 48 hours this morning. I ran out of paper. I was going on to another page. It was crazy. But here are a couple of the key decisions that went for or against Florida State, some more news about visits, and what their competition is doing, because this is a really wild week. I thought it would slow down a little bit, but it really has not. As we all know, Thomas Castellanos has picked Florida State, but there's some other quarterback news. Miller Moss, quarterback USC, is going to Louisville. So another ACC team gets their quarterback, former Florida State quarterback, Luke Krumenoff, in case you hadn't heard. He picked Mississippi State. I was a little surprised by that. Maybe the biggest name of anybody in the portal is now John Mateer, the Washington State quarterback. Just about everybody expects him to go to Oklahoma. That's where his former offensive coordinator at Washington State has taken off to. Terrence Carter, this was a big loss for Florida State. The former Louisiana Lafayette Raging Cajun, he has picked Texas A&M. I thought he was as good, if not the best, H-back / tight end in the portal. He's going to play for the Aggies. Also, there's a visit coming up for Florida State with Adrian Medway. He's a guy that was at UCF under Gus, under Herb. He knows the program. He's going to visit this Thursday per Noles 24/7. He's also got visits with Virginia Tech, North Carolina. Colorado is a possibility as well. Another surprise to me, Lee Hunter. I heard he got a big bag. He's going to Texas Tech. He's the defensive tackle that was originally at Auburn, went to UCF, and now, even though he visited Florida State, he's going to go to Texas Tech. Omega Blake, the wide receiver, he visited Florida State. They're certainly in the mix. He's not done with his decision. This is a big one for the Noles. He can burn. He averaged like 40 yards a catch on passes that went over 20 yards from the line of scrimmage before somebody made contact with the football. Deep threats are hard to find. That was the first guy that Tim Harris Jr., per Noles 24/7, offered. That tells you something. He's a pretty darn good player. He's a kid that was originally at South Carolina. His decision expected, give or take, in the next week to 10 days. But that's something that Florida State fans need to really kind of take a look at. Also, Keegan Trost, Wake Forest offensive lineman. I haven't really researched him, but the Noles just made an offer to him. Sean Murphy, the former Bama transfer that came to Florida State this past year, really didn't have any impact. He is back in the transfer portal. Kendrick Law is, according to Noles 24/7, not going to visit. They're not involved with him anymore. CJ Daniels, the wide receiver from LSU, picked the University of Miami. Nick Anderson from Oklahoma to LSU. Defensive lineman Kelby Collins from Florida to Alabama. Defensive lineman Amaris Williams, big-time recruit in this past class, 2024, had entered the portal, was getting ready to, then something changed. Obviously, Auburn ponied up. He's stuck around with them. Eric Singleton just got, speaking of Auburn, Steve Wiltfong dropped a Fong bomb for Auburn to get him. He's the kid from Georgia Tech who can fly. Dylan Lonergan, quarterback, backup for Alabama, has transferred to Boston College. And then this one surprised me because I remember talking to him at the Under Armour event, and he was just unbelievable high school player. Zachariah Branch played 2 years at Southern Cal. Him and his brother are in the portal. USC is bleeding. They are in a lot of trouble. And that's the last one I want to bring up because I want to bring up this next. And USC failed on my list right here atrociously. Florida State kind of did this last year, and they need to stay away from it. Portal needs, based on where you're at and how to manage the portal. These are just 7 things that I put. And this first one is not only for the staff, but for you guys out there listening, patience. Every day is like it. I have people like, well, how come Florida State hasn't got all these lines? Herb Hand just got there. There's a lot of evaluating to do, and these guys take visits. It is not necessarily a quick process, although it can be. But for offensive linemen, you'll see it'll probably play out a little bit longer. Those guys, as a general rule from a position group, tend to look at things a little bit broader, may take a little more time. Plus, again, the spring window. I've mentioned this earlier for a reason. Florida State may get 2-3 offensive linemen now, and they might get 2-3 after the spring window. It's not necessarily, again, it's not a sprint. It is a marathon. Florida State staff needs to know that. Fans do as well. Team over one player. This is something that I brought up. Pittsburgh did this past year. They let a lot of guys go because, quite honestly, they asked for too much money. They said, you can add on out the door. Pittsburgh improved a lot. Team continuity, players that want to be there, team over player. Florida State failed on that this past year. So did Southern Cal, as I mentioned a moment ago. That can't happen. Signing multi-year players, number 3, O-line in particular. Like, it's cool they got Gunnar Hansen, but Florida State needs to sign 1 or 2 of these linemen at minimum that can play more than 1 year. So they're not just back in the portal every year. They got to get continuity in the offensive line room. This is a bad year for it. I get it. You need some experience. If you sign 2 guys that are 1-year guys, like your right guard and your left tackle, or just 1-year portal, okay. But they need a couple of guys that'll be back in 26 as well. Continuity is very important, and that's at other positions as well. Number 5, with that fit, they need to also have an elite offensive skill player. I want to talk about that in a minute in specific, talk about Blake a little bit more, talk about Deuce Robinson. They need somebody that the opposing team from this transfer portal cycle, or the one in the spring, preferably now, so you can go through spring ball, is a no-doubter. Like, when he walks out on the field, the other team has to scheme against him. Florida State didn't have that guy last year. Teams did whatever they wanted defensively and caused, especially once the young quarterbacks started playing, Brock and Luke, they were just seeing ghosts because they got a lot of different looks, and, of course, the offensive line stunk. You must make other teams fear coming up and blitzing your quarterback or playing press coverage, putting too many in the box, stop there, all that. You must get a big play receiver here. Omega Blake, Deuce Robinson are 2 of those guys. We'll talk about them until this portal cycle is over. Next, there's been a lot of discussion over the last year about Florida State doesn't develop anybody, blah, blah, blah. There's the argument between Florida State and Miami fans. Just want to make a couple of notes on this. Florida State develops high school players as well, but they hit so well on the portal and took guys that were just okay at other places and leveled them up. You got to give them credit. That it's kind of hard for anybody not to say Florida State wasn't a portal program. I mean, Jared Verse is one of the best edge guys in the NFL already. Fisk did a great job. He was there 1 year. They were good at their other schools, but Florida State gave them a bigger platform. They improved their game, and they kept growing. So it's a little of both. Now, that doesn't mean high school guys aren't important. They certainly had guys like Mo, He was a center, was a 6-year player. He was at Florida State 6 years. So they develop guys too. But, Tofili, they've had plenty of those players. It's just that the portal hit so hot. Now, Miami on the other side, they're hitting the portal hard again. They just lost their quarterback, who was a 1-year rental. They lost some defensive players up front. Their D-line's going to take a big hit. We'll see what happens with Miami, but they're not as high school oriented as some of the Miami fans think, but they probably have recruited better. They got a better staff to recruit over the last few years in Florida State, no doubt. That's something to think about. And finally, you also got to think, it's not just who you gain out of the portal. This is more for fans. Who did you lose and why? Speaking of development, Florida State is in a scenario just like any other program. You see guys leave. Was it their impatience? Was it a situation where they were just unrealistic about money? If that happens, then the development doesn't matter. But a lot of times people will pick a school based on money, but then they don't get the best coaching, then they leave. So that's on the player. You got to pick development sometimes over cash, and AKA, did I go to the school that's going to develop me the best on the gridiron? Because you got to have personality fits with the coaches, et cetera, the right scheme, all that stuff. It is complex. So who are you losing? That is also important. When I kind of look around at the college football landscape, I think too many people get too excited about who they're getting and forget a lot of their young guys are leaving because they signed them for the wrong reasons out of the high school ranks for money. And that is definitely a problem. So I think we've got to keep that in mind. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about the keys to Florida State with what they've got left in the transfer pool and what they've got to do. We're going to talk about the 3 biggest things left here. Is it left tackle done? We've got to talk about that some more. Who's the most important guy left? And there's a little bit of a surprise that I want to talk about on the portal as well. That is next here on Locked On Seminoles. It's that time of year. The college football playoff is back. With the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports coverage of the playoff begins December 21st, starting with the college football playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern. Leading into our first matchup, SMU Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns, 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the college football playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. Now, this first one is a little interesting. I've got 3 spots here that I want to talk about, but as I opened and brought up in the show, it's not a lock to me that Gunnar Hansen is your left tackle, but if I had to wager, he is. So after they got James Williams, who's, in my opinion, was the most important guy they could get because they needed an edge guy for the 3-3-5, Tony White, Terrence Knighton, a.k.a. Pot Roast. They got him. Now that they got Hansen, and he had 8 starts at left tackle for Vandy, I'm going to pencil him, not an ink, in pencil Gunnar Hansen at left tackle. That's their number 1 spot, assuming they got him. If they didn't, if they think he's a right tackle, and again, I don't know what Herb thinks, but if Coach Hand thinks he's better at right tackle, number 1 spot still on the board is left tackle. Got to find one. Number 2, and I touched on this a couple times, they got to get a down the field, big play threat, guy makes you miss, whatever. They need somebody at the wide receiver position that the other team can't just say, you know what, screw you guys. We're just going to play man up out there on the edges, and we're going to put an extra guy in the box and try to stop Gus's run game. Because if they have the personnel to do that, you're in deep trouble. An extra hat in the box and you can't win outside, it's not going to work. I don't care what offense it is. That's not a Gus problem. That's an any offense problem. If teams have no concern about what you're doing out there and they're manning up, no good. So that's number 2. But is it better to get Deuce Robinson, the big-bodied guy that can play boundary? Do you like Omega Blake that's a little smaller? He's 6'1", 6'2", something like that, but he can really run? That's debatable. I put it as either or. They need one of the 2. Barring somebody else, I don't think they're involved with Eric Singleton. They need somebody that can get down the field and make big plays. Both Deuce Robinson and Omega Blake are proven in that regard. As an example, Deuce Robinson had some big catches against Notre Dame, who's got one of the most talented secondaries in the country in the last game of the season for the Trojans. Third, strong side defensive end available. Let me explain what I mean by this. Florida State needs a guy that is a power player that can two-gap. This is so hard to find. Like a 280-pound guy that's willing to two-gap part of the time, playing like a 4-eye, just on the inside shade of the offensive tackle. But at the same time, if you really want to get after it, it could be in a one-gap scenario, depending on how they line up. As I mentioned during yesterday's Locked On Seminole show, they're going to run multiple fronts. So sometimes it'll be a one-gap theory on a play. There might be some two-gap. They'll mix it up, but it's got to be a versatile high-end guy. I talked about earlier Florida State's ability to spend X amount of dollars on the offensive lineman, no doubt. As far as one player, they may spend quite a bit on that strong side DN. And if they don't get one, I will be concerned. You need more size, you need more depth, and hopefully it's also somebody that has played in a three-man line before. Experience, experience, experience. There's nothing like it. Florida State's just like anybody else. You want to have continuity. And they've got some coming over from Nebraska, but it would help, even if it's from a different program, if the Noles found somebody that knew how to play that spot. And it's the body type too. 6'4", 280 with long arms. That's what you're looking for. And again, I mentioned this. Don't rule this out, especially short yardage, etc. Depending on the matchup with like a right tackle or what have you. It's possible Darrell Jackson, although I think he'll primarily play nose, could play some strong side DN. I mean, he's a very unique athlete. Depends on how much Darrell works at it, how much Terrence Knighton and the overall defensive staff look at it and say, okay, he's putting in effort. Let's add to his plate a little bit. Here are your assignments. Here are things to look for. He'd have to be more knowledgeable about fronts and stuff that the opposition's running. It's probably going to be more playbook than anything else if he can do it, because physically, Darrell is one of the rare guys over 300 pounds, and he's well over 300 pounds, that can play strong side end. Very, very gifted guy. But I would still rather have Darrell at nose most of the time. And if you've got a power guy there and Williams outside, man, you could change your defense in a heartbeat. As an additional thing, and I'm just going to bring this up. It's something I alluded to right before the break. Florida State, do they get a kicker or a punter? This past season, like Mastromano was so good, you kind of forget about him. You really do. They won a lot of field position battles because of how good they were. Are they going to get any specialists or a guy, a receiver that's a good punt returner, kick returner, long snapper, hold? Those little things get overlooked, and I don't talk about them much either, but that matters to your football program. Florida State is rebuilding from the ground up here, folks. Every position on your depth chart has to be looked at. It's just reality. And I'm not saying they don't have talented players, but reshuffling who plays where, why. Like on the current roster, they may want to look at with new coaches, a certain guy that played defense moved off. There's a million different ways to look at this, but the special teams aspect has to be looked at too as like a fourth thing. I think they've got to get better with that because I think they relied so much on their kicker and punt. Like those guys were elite. They were all Americans. And Sam Singleton, by the way, had the 95-yard kickoff return for a touchdown. He's obviously very talented. But who's your punt returner going to be next year? There's a lot of little things. So that's something Florida State can't forget about. Thank you once again for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen each and every day. I truly appreciate you stopping in to talk some Noles with me. Please hit that like button, that notification bell, and if you have not already, subscribe to the Locked On Seminoles podcast. Share it too. If you could, I'd like to get in front of as many Noles fans as I can. It's awesome to talk Florida State football and all the stuff that's going on with the transfer portal. And if you want to find more, when the next shows are and everything else, head over to FB Scout _Florida. Again, FB Scout _Florida. All the stuff that's going on along this wild ride that we call the transfer portal. I'm talking about it every day on X. Everybody have a good one. Take care.